Welcome to the Diabetes Tour Guide. I am your host, Andy. I have practiced as a physician assistant in the integrative health space for over 4 years, and I have lived with type 1 diabetes for over 19 years. So I know that diabetes, like medicine, is not one size fits all. There are many stops along our tour with many nuances to uncover and master with diabetes. So today, we are stopping at a new destination on our tour to discuss glucose, another important molecule in the story of diabetes. We can almost call glucose kind of the antagonist to the protagonist, insulin. It's not really the antagonist because insulin's a hormone, glucose is not. But it would be insulin almost versus glucagon. But we'll have another separate episode about glucagon. But really, when you're thinking about what happens with diabetes, really you think about insulin and glucose. But it's not, I say, the antagonist. Is it really? Glucose is actually a 6-carbon molecule that is essential to cellular function. So it's a very simple thing. Glucose is very simple. It's basically, we need glucose. So glucose, sometimes people say, oh, we don't need any sugar. You definitely need sugar. Your brain lives on sugar. That's why low blood sugar events are actually really bad for your brain. But glucose comes in many different forms. There's galactose, fructose, sucrose, lactose, starches. And then those get transported into the energy requiring cells and they get broken down into ATP. And ATP is basically energy, fuel for the cells. So if we think simply, we think glucose, broken down, energy. And glucose, too, can come from many different sources, both internally and externally. If you'll see, too, we have an image of the day, and there's different types of sugars. And this diagram honestly gets very, very complicated, but it all stems from carbohydrates. Really, when we're thinking externally, we're thinking about the things that we're eating, and that's really going to come in the form of carbs. And carbs can be many different types of glucose. But this kind of gives you that breakdown of what that looks like. And we'll actually go into detail into further episodes about what each one looks like. But glucose can also be made internally. There are internal sources of glucose. So glucose can technically be broken down from glycogen stores in the liver. It's through a process called glycolysis. So glycolysis means lysis is breakdown or lysing, so breakdown of glucose. Glycogen is basically a storage form of glucose that's in the liver. So when your body recognizes that it needs more glucose, glycogen can be broken down. It can also be made from something called gluconeogenesis. New, which is neo, glucose, formation or genesis. And that can be made actually from protein and fat storages in the body. So basically with glucose, it's this very, it's glycosylated. It's this very sharp, small molecule that is very essential for energy. It kind of gets a bad rap when there's too little or too much, when we get thrown out of something called homeostasis, which is basically like a seesaw that's balanced. Imbalances can throw things off one way or the other. So needless to say, there's many different resources to make glucose and to get glucose from the environment. It supports the body by providing energy. So what happens when there's too little? What happens when there's too much? Join us next week as we go along our tour of glucose and along our even further journey of diabetes as we start to discover what happens when glucose is too low in something called hypoglycemia. I know there were a lot of stops on our tour, but stick with me, your tour guide, as we journey together. So until next time, take care.